Hey guys, here today showing you how to replace the front brake pads and rotors on a 2006 Mercedes CLS55 AMG. This is a W219 chassis. This would be identical to the W211 E55, as they are essentially the same car underneath. This will probably work for the 2000 through 2006 S65, possibly the S55, the CL55, all the AMG models from 2000 through 2006. This should apply to all of those, as they all pretty much use the same front brake setups. Obviously not the same chassis, they don't look the same, but the brakes are pretty much the same. So the first thing you'll need to do obviously is to jack the car up, get it on jack stands. You will not need a whole lot of tools for this job. As you can see here, I got the Zimmerman rotors, I got Akebono pads, new brake wear sensors. I got all this stuff from FCP Euro, check them out, they're great. I do have some of the tools here laying out. You will need a hammer. You don't need impacts at all. I am just choosing to use them because it's easier for me. I need some zip ties to hold the brake caliper up when you take it off. Some WD-40 will help you get the old rotor off. You'll need a T30 Torx to remove the retaining screw for the rotor. You'll need an 18mm socket, or you can possibly use a wrench. I have a few, as you can see there's an 18mm and an 18mm here, there's an 8mm here. These are just some of the tools I'm pretty sure I'm going to need offhand. If I do see that I need something else, I'll definitely let you guys know. But obviously, as I said, you need to jack the car up, get down jack stands. Okay, so the first thing you need to do before you get into doing the brakes, after you jacked up the car and everything, is to open up the hood and loosen, or actually take off, this connector that's on the SBC. This is like what runs the brakes. It's not actually like a traditional just push the pedal and that operates the master cylinder whatnot. It's actually like electronic brakes. So every time you open the door, if you notice on your guys' cars, I have Airmatic, you open the doors, the car may adjust itself on the suspension. At this time, it's also priming every corner for the brakes, which is pushing the pistons out onto the pads, making sure that they're ready to go. And when you're doing the brakes, so you don't want that to happen, because you actually need to compress the pistons back into the calipers in order to fit the new pads in. So by disconnecting this, that disables everything, so nothing, the brakes will not work. Guys have done the brakes without taking this off. They simply just did not open up any of the doors at all, and they just worked outside, and then that worked for them. But I've worked on a lot of these cars, and I always disconnect this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. You just simply pull up on this here. This lever just pulls straight up, and at the same time the connector will slide backwards off of that. You may find that you need to use like a flathead screwdriver in here to help you pry it off. Don't go too crazy on it so you don't break it, but you do need to wiggle it a little bit just so that it will come off a little bit easier. So that's the first thing you need to do. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Okay, you want to remove the lug studs. They are 17mm. You get your wrench. If you don't have an impact, you need to put the car back down on the ground and break these loose before you jack the car up. So now you'll be looking at the brakes themselves. What I recommend is to go inside and stick the key into the ignition You shouldn't need to turn it, just stick it in there and it should unlock the steering lock. You'll probably hear like an electronic kind of noise or whatever. And then turn the wheel all the way to the left so that way you can have clear access to the back of the caliper, and that way it's just easier to work so you can see what you're doing. Okay, the first thing we'll want to do is to remove the brake wear sensor, which is located right here. I like to use a needle nose, pull them out of the connector like so, and then they just pop right into the back of the pads. Also just use a pair of needle nose pliers and you can just pull them right out. This is what it looks like. This is the old one. I have a new set, so I'm just going to throw this away. If you did not buy new wear sensors, I suggest buying them. They only cost $3 per side, maybe $4. But if for some reason you don't have them, if you pull these out gently, especially here on this side, there's a metal clip that goes around them. If you pull them out nice enough, you should be able to reuse them in a pinch. But like I said, they cost $3 or $4 a piece, so just buy new ones if you can get it. Then the next thing you want to do is to actually remove this connector here, which is where the brake sensor plugged into. You can use a 8mm wrench to break that loose. I just use an 8mm wrench. I mean, you can use a socket as well. That will go ahead and break that loose. Make sure you don't lose the bolt. Actually, this is you should be using the correct tool, which is a Torx. I will let you know what the right size is, but an 8mm does work and it doesn't strip these out. But yeah, there is a correct tool to use for this one, and like I said, I'll put that down below so you can see what it is. Then this guy, you can just kind of just hang him off here to the side. The next thing you'll need to do is to grab a hammer, and you can use a punch because you'll need to drive these pins out that are located right here. The two pins that are holding the spring retainers in. There's obviously two pads up here and two pads in here. These two metal clip looking things hold the pads in, and these things are held on by these pins here. So these simply just slide straight out the back on both sides. You can tap them here on the front. That'll start them. And then now the correct tool to use is a punch or a drift. I always just use this small Phillips screwdriver because I know I found that it worked and I use it all the time now. So you can use that to drive these pins out. So you can push down, after you get it out of this first hole right here, it's usually pretty easy to just pull them out by hand. If you push this spring down and then use your other hand to pull it out, it'll come out. Like so. So you pull this one out, you go ahead and pull the bottom one out as well. These springs right here, they just come out. It doesn't matter which way they go, so don't be worried if you don't remember what direction they were. They are symmetrical, so they go in either way. Okay, now that you've got both those pins out and the springs out, take a flathead screwdriver, and now you should be replacing the rotors as I'm showing you in this video. If for some reason you're not, you're gonna have to be careful on this part because you will have to pry on the rotor a little bit to get the pads out. Alternatively, you can stick a flathead here and hit it on the side to try and push the pistons back in, so that way you can remove the pads easily. But I like to just stick a screwdriver in here and kind of pry away on the rotor, so that way it pushes the piston back in, and at the same time you can go ahead and just pull the pads out of their space like so. You'll do the same on the other side, kind of pry away on the rotor. You just need to pry enough so that you can get the so that you can pull the pads out. So here's the other pad on this side. I would like to note that you should put a drain pan underneath the car. That way, in case there is excess brake fluid that comes out, it will just fall down into the drain pan. Okay, after you got the pads out, you'll need to turn your attention to the back of the caliper. And I'm sorry I can't get a good camera angle at it, but they're really easy to spot. They're two 21 millimeter. I know I had an 18 millimeter earlier. I don't know what I was thinking. They're two 21 millimeter bolts. One is about right here, and the other one is about right here, just on the back of this caliper. You'll need to loosen both of those up, and then that'll allow you to take the caliper and set it to the side. Then that way we can focus on getting the rotor out. So you will need a 21 millimeter. I suggest you have a breaker bar or something like that of some sort, because these are probably going to be on pretty hard. So I'll go ahead and pull those off now. Okay, this is one of the bolts that I was talking about, 21, that's in the back. It's pretty short. I already took one out, so I'm gonna go ahead and loosen up the other one, like so. Then you will be able to just take the caliper and, like I said, use some zip ties to hang it off to the side, so that way we can focus on getting the rotor off. Okay, now that you got the caliper properly supported, so that way it's not hanging by the brake hose, go back inside the car and turn the wheel back straight so we can get a good look at the front of the rotor. Okay, now that you got the wheel straight, so that we don't have to worry about it later and it can work, go ahead and take some WD-40 and just spray some around the center of the rotor here, because well, this one's not very badly rusted on, but sometimes these things are pretty rusted on. Now we'll focus on taking off this retaining screw. It is a T30 Torx. They're generally not on very hard. As you can see, this one came off easy, and actually my rotor went on ahead and came off easy as well. So just loosen this all the way up, and it'll come right out just like so in your hand. Then if for some reason your rotor doesn't come off as easily as this one did, see, this one just slid right off. It's pretty easy. You will want to take and hit the face of the rotor. This is obviously not the rotor, this is the hub, but where the rotor is sitting at, hit the these rotors are pretty heavy. Hit the rotor on the face. Don't hit it up here. Don't hit it around this area. Hit it like down here on the face, and that should break it free if yours is pretty rusted on. So yeah, now we can just go ahead and grab our new rotor and stick it on. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and take our new rotor and stick it on. Don't forget to line up the there's a hole here on the new rotor. You see the little one? Make sure that lines up properly with the hole on the hub, because that's where you'll need to put the retaining screw back in. And now we can go on ahead and put the brake caliper back on. So again, go inside, turn the wheel all the way to the right, or excuse me, all the way to the left, so that you can see what you're doing again. Okay, now that you got the caliper back on and you got the two 21 millimeter bolts torqued down, I believe they're torqued to 135 foot-pounds, you can go on ahead and focus on getting the new pads into place. This may or may not be the most difficult part of this job, but if you take a peek in there, all of the pistons you'll see are not level, or some of them are out farther than the other ones. You could use a tool that is like it's like a compression tool like this, but it has a ratcheting handle on it, and it has two of these pads on it. So when the caliper is off, you stick it in the middle, and as you're ratcheting, it spreads the pads apart so that it pushes the pistons back into the caliper evenly. I don't have one of those tools. You can buy one if you like. I'll probably show you a picture of what it looks like, but I've done these brakes many a times without using them. What I like to do is to look in here and see if there's already enough space to fit a new pad in any one of these slots. Then go ahead and stick the new pad in there and leave it in there. So if a new pad went right here in this spot, slide it in there and leave it, that's fine. Then stick an old pad on the other side like this, just slide it back into place. And then use a flathead screwdriver, you stick it straight in here and pry it towards you. So if you're working on the inner pads, pry the screwdriver towards you, that way you're prying right here just barely on the outer lip of the rotor, and you're not scratching up the surface of the rotor when you're prying the opposite direction. So if you're on the inside pads, pry towards you. That'll push the pistons in, and you can take the old pad back out and slide the new pad back in. And it'll slide right into place like so. And then you'll do the same on the opposite. As I said, you'll find out which one you'll be able to work with. If you find you cannot stick a new pad into any of these slots, just stick an old pad in any slot you want to. And just remember, if you're working on the inside pads, pry towards you. If you're working on the outside pads here, push in towards the car. That way you're prying on the outermost piece of this rotor, and you're not going to damage it that way. So I already have all 4 of these installed. It really doesn't matter which direction you have these in, although you'll probably notice that every pad will have a little hole, will have a hole like this on the bottom of it. That's to accept the wear indicator with the holes. The only one that's going to matter if you're working on the right side of the car is that the top left pad needs to have those holes at the very top, because that's where you have to connect the wear sensor to. So I already have all these installed. The next thing you want to do is to go on ahead and reinstall the pins that hold the calipers in, as well as the spring retainers. You just pretty much just set the spring retainers. You'll see there's divots that are located in the pads already. There's already little notches that are in the pads. So you'll just take and hold the spring in place, and then you'll slide the the pin in. You can probably hammer it in, I guess, just to make it a little bit easier for yourself, because it will be a little bit hard to put in at first. So you'll get that in, and then you'll go on ahead and just continue to hit it in with the hammer so you can get it to start on the other side. This may or may not be a little bit difficult, but you'll just have to play with it some, and eventually you'll get it to go in. As you'll notice when you're first sticking this in, it's not really lining up at the other side. That's when you need to use a little bit of muscle to kind of force the spring down and get that to start into the hole. You will note that as you're pushing these pins in, and if when you get it lined up with the other side, the spring is going to want to tend to slide along with it. Just try and drive this center pin all the way in, and then come back with this flathead screwdriver or so, and just give some quick taps to the spring retainer, and it'll go back and sit in the place where it needs to be. And just make sure that you do drive these pins all the way in so that they're locked in place and they don't fall out. After you got the pads, the spring retainers, and the pins back in, you can go on ahead and install the new brake wear sensor or your old one. As you'll see on the very tip of it, sorry it's not focusing, there's a little plastic pin that just slides straight into the holes that are provided in the pads. So when you're installing these, the connector, as you can see here, will be facing towards you. You'll just take and push the wear sensor directly into the pad and just let it sit there. Then you'll go on ahead and grab the connector. If you remember, we took the connector off earlier. The connector that's up here, that's held on by the 8mm screw. Go on ahead and reinstall that back into place. Tighten that down. Then you can go on ahead and plug the wear sensor directly into its spot. You just push it straight in, and then I just grab a flathead screwdriver and push it in the rest of the way, like so. And that's all there is to it. Before you reconnect the connector under the hood, make sure you do the other side. When that's done, you can reconnect the connector. Then you'll go on ahead and stick the key into the ignition, or alternatively you can press the unlock button and that should prime the whole system for you. You may have to do that a few times before the pads will actually make contact, because if I wiggle these now they're pretty loose. But press the unlock button and then that should prime the whole system for you after you've reconnected the connector. And then you can go ahead and go out for a test drive. You may have a like a service brake warning or something like that comes on the dash in the first few miles. That's okay. After a while it should go away. But just take care when you first initially go to stop. Make sure you do have enough room and that there's nobody in front of you or anything like that. I just like to test it because you never know with these electronics if anything could go wrong or anything. I just like to make sure that the brakes do actually work before I go on ahead and try and go out and stop from 100 miles an hour, because that just obviously doesn't make sense. So if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section below. If it's your first time to the channel, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. The channel's been growing steadily, slowly but surely, and I do appreciate that. I appreciate you guys watching. So if you do have any questions at all, I do answer anything to the best of my knowledge. So feel free to ask me any questions you have, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the way out. All right, thanks guys.